Hi, I'm Max Keiser. Welcome back to the Keiser Report. Time now to go to New York. Talk with Reggie Middleton of BoomBustBlog.com, where you can find exclusive and valuable forensic analysis. Reggie, welcome back to the Keiser Report.
Well, thank you, sir.
All right, Reggie, 2 months ago, here on the Keiser Report, you warned the audience about German debt. You were right. Where do you expect German debt to trade going forward?
It's a twofold story. Right now, German debt is a flight to quality trade, apparently, and everybody who's concerned about the more profligate states in the monetary union and the EU are basically running to the German bonds. I think, from a personal opinion and also from the outside looking in, that they're failing to take a realistic look at the situation. Germany is an export nation, a strong economy, but primarily an export economy. They export to the same nations who everybody's running away from. So Germany may be the best of a lot, but a lot that's in the same situation. Think of a Roach Motel. Germany lives in the same Roach Motel as everybody else. They just have the penthouse suite.
So if S&P downgrades German and French debt, is the Eurozone finished?
The downgrades, in my opinion, are at the consternation of the European political officials, but much of that debt shouldn't have been AA and AAA rated anyway. I noticed problems starting in 2009. The problems were explicit in 2010, and they were getting worse, yet they were carrying strong investment-grade ratings. Usually, S&P and the other rating agencies appear to a pile of ashes with a fire hose looking to put a fire out at a house. They always get there too late. Instead of complaining about the downgrades, what investors should be doing is complaining about why the downgrades are coming in such an untimely fashion after the fact.
All right, now you talk about Germany having the penthouse suite at the Roach Motel. Let's talk about America for a second. Now, American banks have been writing credit default swaps on European sovereign debt. Will they be able to cover these insurance products if the European nations default?
It all depends if they can wiggle out of having the default being declared a default. As you may know, a lot of the stakeholders are trying to say that a default will not be a default because it will be, quote unquote, a voluntary loss of your money, which is oxymoronic. It makes no sense who voluntarily loses their money. So if they can wiggle out of a credit default event, the U.S. banks may survive. Or may survive and possibly flourish because they took those CDS premiums and never had to pay out. It's like getting paid for insurance, never having to pay for the loss. As for that coming to fruition and happening, it seems like a long shot. You know, at the very least, you would have litigation for years. One very interesting point on this is an article that was written by or published by Reuters when they examined MF Global and MF Global's fall. In a nutshell, MF Global was using excessive leverage stemming from hypothecation and rehypothecation of securities. Basically, they took client securities and they used it as collateral against their own very risky bets against European debt. These bets were multiples of their equity. And of course, as soon as things started going against them, they were getting margin calls, the whole Ponzi collapsed, and $1.2 billion and counting of client money has been missing. This level of leverage is totally off balance sheet, not visible or available to investors, and is not endemic to just MF Global. Lehman Brothers did it, Goldman Sachs is doing it, JP Morgan's doing it, and they're doing it with more than $2 or $3. If I'm not mistaken, the exposure to Goldman Sachs is about 51 billion, 27 to 51 billion. JP Morgan is doing it to the tune of several hundred billion, over 100 billion. This level of leverage, combined with the fact that you have CDS that may have a claim or may not have a claim, combined with the fact that the underlying collateral behind the bets are decreasing significantly. Greece is trading at an average of about 27 cents on the dollar now. It means that you have a Ponzi house of cards that, if it collapses, are going to take several systems down, not just European banks, but it's bound to drag other banks with it. So I'm curious to see what will happen, but I think that there's going to be a major reset of the system from a financial entity perspective coming. The only problem is when. You know, you can't time it, but I don't see a way out of it because we have lots of debt, we have lots of risk, very, very little equity or negative equity. And we have relatively little income and revenue because of austerity measures and declining economies. And this is across Europe, the US, and Asia, with China being, the number prime example.
Right now, keeping on the MF Global story, I don't know if you saw this news or not, but It turns out that there's a regulatory loophole in London, in the city of London, that allows for this rehypothecation scandal. It takes on a new dimension. Because in the United States, the level of hypothecation or rehypothecation can run at 140% or so if you've got those government securities that you're lending against or margining against. However, in the UK, that number is infinite. There is no top. There is no ceiling to the amount of relending or rehypothecating you can do. It goes on infinitely. And for this reason, MF Global, their key component of their firm, ran through London, as did Lehman Brothers, as did AIG, as did Bernie Madoff. Why doesn't somebody wake up and turn this loophole, shut it down in London? Because it's clearly at the root of the entire global meltdown. Your thoughts?
You take a look at the firms that you mentioned and see what lobbying dollars went where. Everybody has a constituency, okay? And I think often the layperson assumes that they are their representative's constituency. That may be the case if you look at it, the marketing material from certain elected or appointed representatives, but in reality, that's not the case. You know, your constituency are the people who empower you, whether it's empowered by vote or by economic means.
So in other words, when David Cameron talks about safeguarding the City of London, what he's talking about is safeguarding this incredible loophole of fraud that is really at the genesis of the global collapse is what he's safeguarding. But now, shortly before MF Global went bust, Reggie Middleton, they were granted primary dealer status. Can you tell us what that means exactly, a primary dealer, and what that gives them in terms of privileges?
Well, it's interesting. A primary dealer is a bank or financial entity that has been blessed by the Federal Reserve and the U.S. government to be able to broker, buy, sell, and resell U.S. government debt on a first-come basis. They basically act as a go-between between the government and buyers. In order to do that, I think there's only, I can't remember, there may be between 12 and 17 primary dealers. I forget the exact number. But in order to get that status, you have to be vetted by the government. And one of the reasons, of course, would be that you have to be credible. You have to have the financial stability and strength to do that. They were just given primary dealer status, between 1 to 3 months before they went bankrupt, which begs the question, exactly how thorough did the Federal Reserve vet MF Global? Or a better question is, what did they vet them for? Obviously, they didn't vet them for risk management or financial stability. And even if you give the Federal Reserve a pass, MF Global was still overseen by the CFTC and the CME. So with this extreme vetting process of the most powerful regulatory and financial entities in the world, MF Global got a pass and collapsed between 1 and 3 months later. You know, their track record is 100% inverse to what you consider credible.
Gosh, I hope the White House does a better job vetting their Secret Service agents, or we got some trouble in the White House. Now so your thoughts. There are reports of fraud, reverse wire transfers, all kinds of fraud. Reggie Middleton, are you telling people about their own brokerage accounts that some pundits, some firm managers, some money managers are actually pulling out of funds from brokerage? They just don't see it as being a safe place anymore. Your thoughts? Is it safe to keep your funds in a brokerage anymore?
You have a significant risk that a lot of people didn't anticipate before. Seton Hall University, which is, I think, one of the only private law universities in New Jersey, came up with a report where they basically reviewed the review of Lehman Brothers collapse from 2008. And their conclusions was that despite the fact that there was blatant fraudulent actions, blatant backdating of risk management measures to make Lehman Brothers operations look less risky than they were, despite the fact it was evident that business was collapsing, they did not break or violate enough mandates, laws, or regulations to justify a slap on the wrist. That in itself tells you how much risk you're taking when you put your money in a brokerage account. What happened to MF Global is essentially what happens to what can happen to any other bank. My grandmother used to always tell me, there's never one roach. If you see a roach, there are other roaches there. You haven't come across it. So what MF Global did, Goldman is currently doing. If you take a look at my website, you'll see where Goldman Sachs had reduced their derivative exposure and increased their sovereign debt exposure at the same time that the derivative bubble was, had popped, was finished popping, and the sovereign debt bubble is expanding. So they did exactly what they shouldn't have done at the exact wrong time. And if you also look at the Reuters report, you see that they have significant leverage off balance sheet and almost untraceable due to hypothecation and rehypothecation and repledging. And this is off balance sheet. So if you look at this amount of leverage, you look at the amount of risk they're taking, you look at their timing, which is basically awful, I just couldn't feel safe when my money's there. The best way to do it is to split your monies around several accounts, but you just don't have a law, according to the Seton Hall report, that creates a consequence for wrongdoing.
So, exactly. So in other words, the people say, is my money safe in a brokerage account? The brokerage account will say, even though we've lost all this customer money, we didn't break any laws. I think that should be your tip-off.
Exactly.
If they don't think if they think stealing money is a good idea, then if you keep your money at a brokerage account, then you deserve kind of what you get. Now, finally, Reggie Middleton, you've always been ahead of the rating agencies on really identifying true state of risk and what the next big risk coming down the pike is. You were very early and very right on the whole housing collapse. So tell us, give us a preview what the next big sector or stock or commodity that you see that you're telling the people that follow you is going to be the next big risk hotspot.
I think the next big risk is the last big risk that nobody paid attention to. The counterparty risk with the banks is excessive. You know, the amount of leverage that they're instituting with the minimum equity and the lack of any real discipline is outrageous. And despite that, you know, people are still bidding up stocks. You know, people are still putting bids on the assets that have a very gloomy future. I think that the banking industry should be mark to market in general. Okay, when you have strong banks, let them trade. But it's very difficult to say XYZ bank is strong when it is highly leveraged into banks that are 3 seconds from blowing up and being held up only by the assistance from the European Central Bank or the Fed, etc. And the problem with the banking system, the global banking system, is it's so highly interconnected. You know, it's only as strong as its weakest link, and its weakest link is ready to pop momentarily.
All right, Reggie Middleton, we're out of time. Thanks for being on the Keiser Report.
You're very welcome. Look forward to coming back.
All right, that's going to do it for this edition of the Keiser Report with me, Max Keiser, and Stacey Herbert. I want to thank my guest, Reggie Middleton of BoomBustBlog.com. If you'd like to send me an email, please do so at keiserreport@rttv.ru. Till next time, Max Keiser saying bye, y'all.